Hello, welcome back to the Will I Vike It podcast. I'm your host, Craig Brooks, and today I'm joined by the leading Viking archaeologist in food, Daniel Serra. So welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, that's nice being here. And yeah.
After a few technical issues, we finally got going.
Yeah.
So you call yourself a culinary archaeologist. So I think it's probably a good place to start is to explain what that is.
Yeah, I mean, archaeologists usually tend to look at, well, we go back to archaeology and food. Most archaeologists, when they look at food, look at the sort of what finds do you have, what was the diet, and they sort of stop at the level of diet. So they were eating mainly this kind of grain, or they had mainly marine or land-based diet, but it doesn't really go further than that. If you look at most archaeological conclusions and summaries, what I want to look at is to reconstruct the food as food culture, the tastes, the composition of food, which is of course a bit more speculative than just saying that 70% of all the grains were barley. So I have to go a bit further, and I usually try to divide how we present the food in sort of 4 categories. So you have the first would be the sort of positive evidence, that the one that museums and archaeological reports usually tend to present, saying that we found this on this site. We found these seeds and these sorry. And we found these bones. We found bones of cattle, sheep, goat, pork in this combination. Then you have the sort of probable level. That's what I'm coming in. I'm looking at the evidence and try to reconstruct how could this have been cooked. What is the probable combination between ingredients, cooking equipment, and cultural context?
Yeah.
Then the next level will be sort of possible. What you would find perhaps more often in the reenactments. Sort of a good guess, but it's you don't take it all the way of trying to see if it works. Experimental archaeology, you use ingredients, but in a way that sort of fits your modern mind.
Yeah.
And then you have the 4th level would be sort of positive thinking or fantasy, where people, I guess you've encountered as well, sort of people say, well, they had meat, they could ground it up, they could put it between 2 pieces of bread with some, and you could have a hamburger, or which I actually have encountered even at the museum. Well, they made the flatbreads and they could put something on the top.
And you got your pizza.
And people put sort of Viking pizza because that's a recognizable or something they want to, an end result that you want to get to.
Yeah. Do you know, I recorded with someone else a while back, a friend of mine, and we lost the episode, unfortunately, but we kind of discussed that and we made Viking pasta.
Yeah.
So just to say, where do you draw that line?
Yes, exactly. So that's I think the line has to be drawn at what the cultural context would be like.
Sure.
So even if you have all the equipment, all the ingredients for something, some things are just not sort of conceived of. And that I would say is a difference between the sort of positive thinking, the sort of fantasy, and the idea of what was possible and then was probable. Another way of this fantasy thing is people really want to have some ingredients like potatoes. Well, they went to the Americas, some might have brought back, and so forth. So you encounter that, especially in forums and people discussing off lectures or stuff. Yes.
Yeah. So what was it that made you kind of want to go down that route rather than sort of traditional archaeology and go down the more experimental?
I would say a love of food to start with. So I was interested in food, and when I was a student, I was curious to what did people eat, because, well, I liked eating. I like good food, and so when I was a student, I was looking into, well, what did the people eat at a time I was studying, I started doing classic archaeology, and of course went down looking at Apicius and the Roman recipes, which is we have recipes, and I made did some medieval archaeology, looked at medieval recipes where recipes survive, and then I had a chance to start on my PhD, and the opening was in Viking Age or prehistoric era, so I could choose something in the prehistoric, and it was Viking Age, and then I didn't have the recipes. So at that point, I was going much more into the experimental archaeology point of view, but still with my idea of what were people eating, not just what was the diet. So and to look into what people were eating as foodstuff, as dishes rather than just diet, it's really good way of disseminating archaeology to have people experiencing the past and get a living idea of what would it taste like, what would life have been like. And you can also have it as talking point for looking into ideologies and religion or societal context. So that's more or less how it got started, and then it's sort of the rabbit hole never ended.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I mean, I don't know if you know, I'm actually a painter and decorator for a living. And I'm just a reenactor as a hobbyist. And it has sort of gradually spiraled. And it's become like a small business for me now. It's starting to take over a little bit. And it's a similar story. I mean, I didn't do the sort of university archaeology route, but it's just started with that sort of love of food, and then once I got into the Viking era, that was the way I went with it. So
I remember meeting at the Midgårdsblot just before we started.
Did, yes. That would be pre-COVID. So that's I reckon 2018 probably. 5 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
a few workshops there. 2018 or 2019 or 2017, 2017 could have been even 2017, 2018.
It could have been. I was there 2017 as well, I think. I'm not sure. Yeah. You gave a talk on Viking Age food in the museum.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure if it was 17.
It was a while ago. Anyway, I kind of thought we might discuss exactly how you then go about your approach to recreating food. So as you said already, we don't have any recipes or not much to go on. So what's your approach to the...
So as you said, it's experimental archaeology is sort of the main point. But I do start, well, and this is, I recently did a talk on this. And so I usually start off with looking at what are the finds of sort of ingredients, and what are the finds of cooking equipment. This is still very vague, and it's sort of like emptying out the cookbook. If you take a cookbook and just get every recipe out, and you just put down all the different cooking methods, all the different ingredients, and you can recreate it, sort of re-spin it any way you want. So my first point is sort of looking into, well, how does the ingredients work with the cooking equipment? So I try out a stone, sort of soapstone vessel, see how does thing cook in that, how does thing cook in the large metal pot. The spits then being used, well, how do they work with different kind of meats or different chunks? And just to get an idea, so this is my sort of first experiment. And I usually say that I'm doing experimental archaeology and experiential archaeology, because not everything is sort of scientifically provable, but I get some ideas from doing things repeatedly as well. So this is my first start, and from there I can build a kind of a first hypothesis. So this works with this works with this, and then I do another trial based on those ideas. Then the next part will be looking into contemporary and near contemporary sources. For instance, I look into the sagas. Sometimes the sagas will have a small phrase. Well, most sagas are written down in the medieval period, but we assume that many of them are based on oral tradition. So sometimes in the sagas you can find that the food has sort of a central place, and it has probably more likely to have been based on the oral tradition, because you build the saga around this food item. Whereas in other places, it's just there to sort of illustrate the feast hall, and then it might be less relevant in the sort of the oral context. It's just something that you can fit for your audience.
Yeah.
So you have to have this thing going on, thinking of looking into what is the relevance of this for the story. And something this is, of course, will be my interpretation of it. And then I look into medieval sources to looking into how are they using the equipment. Because even though the recipes have changed quite a bit, you have different ingredients, a different way of thinking, a different context of cooking. The way of using a iron pot or ceramic vessels will not have changed that much, because the technique is the same.
Yeah.
So, for instance, what I find when I'm looking into medieval cookbooks is that almost every recipe, at least the Scandinavian ones, say that you simmer the meat, do not boil the meat. And that sort of changes the way we're thinking as well. So you have these kind of... All right, I've actually forgot one step that will be in the beginning.
Yeah.
So, sorry for being a bit...
No, that's fine.
Yes, so before you do all this, and we'll get back to this with the text sources, before you do all this, you have to sort of readjust a bit of your thinking, because all of us are modern people. We live in a modern context. So you have to sort of scale off. It's not just about the ingredients and cooking method. You have to scale off some of the ways we're thinking of food today. So I usually go back and sort of take away all the innovations, the sort of culinary innovations we have had that deeply impact how we cook food. For instance, mid 20th century, we get, or even early 20th century, we get the fridge and cooling techniques. That influences how you store things, when you can eat things. We eat fresh meat, we have vegetables all around the year. So the combination is completely different. So scale that way, you will once again be back to preservation. You will have dried vegetables, stored vegetables. The meat will have to be salted or stored, dried, made in ways that can keep. Mid 19th century, we got cheap cast iron. That changes also. We get the iron stove. Which changes how you cook. If you cook from that, go from an open fire to cook on an iron stove, that will change quite a bit.
It's very different. It's
a very different way of cooking, and lots of cookbooks came out talking about how you should do things. The ovens of the iron stove is completely different from the older wood-fueled ovens, so it will change completely. Another thing that happened in that same period is with cast iron is frying pans. Frying pan in medieval Viking Age context is quite an expensive tool.
I've got one somewhere here, I think. There's one just next to me here. Look.
And that would be really hard work of making. If it's cast iron, it becomes considerably cheaper. And that, of course, influence. And today, I mean, look at least in European cooking, we fry quite a lot of things. So if you scale that away, you will have a different way of preparing the food as well. And then another innovation that influences a lot is by the 17th century, 16th, 17th century, the fork. Remove the fork and you will have to eat in a different way. So when you have the fork and a knife, and as we do today, you get this large piece of meat or whatever you have as main. You will, if you take that away, you will have to cut up everything into morsels that you can take up with a spoon or fingers. You will not be cutting things up on your plate.
It'd
That
certainly
also,
be difficult.
yes, and it's also the,
Yeah,
influences how you cook things, how you prepare the food. You prepare with
yeah,
that in mind.
yeah.
So these are just few. There are plenty of other sort of innovations or changes as well. Sugar, how you plate and serve things, new ingredients, new
Mm,
thinking about food that sort of turns up in the mid 18th century. So there's lots of things changing, and you have to sort of
yeah,
step back from each of these changes and try to uh, sort of demodernize you.
yeah, yeah,
And so then that is a starting point before I can start even doing the experiments. So I have to have this in mind. All right, I have to cook
yeah.
within this context. Uh, so that's influences a lot. But back to
Mm,
the written sources. So
yeah,
I go to the medieval sources, look how they use things. Then I look into also contemporary continental sources. We have some we have a Frankish cookbook. We have definitely we have some medical sources from Anglo-Saxon origin, uh,
mm,
where you can see, and some of these sort of recipes for medical purposes are very much like cooking recipes. So I
yeah,
used some inspiration from that as well. So then when I've done my sort of settled on how I'm going to use the technique with the ingredients, then I'll look into the resources and reassess, do a new hypothesis, and then try it out. And so I'll use the techniques as they are described in the medieval sources. I'll try to look into combinations that are perhaps not obvious to us, but could be found in the Viking sagas or in the Anglo-Saxon medical records. And then I'll taste it and go with another hypothesis, always on the lookout for new ingredients found in archaeological excavations or a new context for instance, for how oven would have been used. Or so there's always, so I say it's a never-ending experimental loop.
yeah, yeah. It's
So
funny, isn't it? Because like I think like the idea of a cookbook to someone at the time as well just wouldn't make any sense because it
no,
involves you getting certain ingredients to make that dish, whereas they would use certain things that they've got available and the cooking techniques that they know.
yes, well, I mean,
Right.
it's not. Well, I mean, if you look at continental, you would have you have a cookbook in a Frankish context, but it is
Mm.
a medical source. But they are really not written in the same way. It's not described in the same way as we do today.
Yeah.
It's more like use that and that, cook it, and serve it.
They're
So
quite
it's
vague.
very vague, and
Yeah.
so you're supposed to have some experience doing this.
Mm.
But yeah, but I think the cultural context is very important as well, because even if something is made in Frankish France or in ancient Rome, doesn't mean it was made up in Scandinavia. So you have to have that as a sort of filter.
Mm.
So because I often encounter this idea that, well, but the Romans did this, so wouldn't it been possible for the Vikings to? Well, it's possible, but it's not really. We don't have the context. One of these issues that I'm quite often is in sort of argument about is spices. Spices have been found in Europe. I think it's found as far north as Cologne,
Mm.
Cologne, in 1050s by traders, so that they were importing exotic spices as far north
Yeah.
as that. You have it in ancient Rome. So it was in Europe, but we don't have any finds of it in Scandinavia, and it's one of those things that yeah, I think you really have to start it using the culture for it being sort of uh, being entering the idea of the culinary world.
Mm.
So it's not until we're, in my opinion, based on what I can see on the finds and text sort of context, it's not until the medieval period when we're sort of and Scandinavia becomes part of Europe, and you get the European food culture, which in turn has gotten its food culture inspired by the Middle East, but through Spain. So you have, and also ancient Rome, but you have this kind of steps where you have to include the sort of mental context. Where are you? Who do you belong to? Before you start adding something new and expensive like that. So I see a few museums using exotic spices. I see quite a few reenactors using exotic spices in the recreations. For instance, black pepper is the most common, of course, because that's quite common for us. And that's also sort of, that's a bit of a difficult step to make things taste good without using the spices and herbs we are used to. Salt is another question. That's sort of how much salt do they use? Whether using salt as a condiment and
or a preservative.
Yes, and if not, how will it taste using it just for the preservative, using just the salted meat or the salted butter? Can we adjust the food to taste well to our taste buds anyway?
Yeah, no, I think particularly with my first book, I did overuse certain things, and it was a sort of lack of experience at the time. There's certain things I would do differently now. And one is that there is pepper in quite a few of the dishes. The only reason that I've never gone back and changed it is because then you get two different versions of the same book. And it's not fair on people to have two different versions sort of to compare. And I figure something like pepper, if you don't want to use it, is quite easy for someone to say they shouldn't have pepper and take it out. And it's still most of the dishes still work. So it's something I don't use as frequently. When we're at reenactment events and I'm doing cookery courses, I tend to steer clear of a lot of spices and stuff that maybe I would have used originally.
Yeah. So, and then you can look into what herbs would have been giving a similar. For instance, I can use a bit of mustard seeds to get the sort of peppery taste, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Then of course we're still at a loss because there could be taste combination that we can't really imagine because they're so different from ours.
Yeah.
For instance, I do quite a lot of medieval cooking as well, and in the sort of it's a Danish medieval cookbook which I did a Swedish translation of and interpretations of, and there's a dish using it's a chicken dish using quite a lot of sugar. So it's you should take 1/4 sugar to the amount of chicken meat, which to our taste buds will taste really strange.
Yeah.
But the question is, do we do something? Is there something wrong in the recipes? Is there something wrong in the interpretation? Or is there something that has changed considerably when we our appreciation of sweetness?
It could go either way, couldn't it? Because even with modern cookbooks, you get things that are written wrong. The quantities are slightly off. So it could be a mistake. It could be something that was what they ate.
Yes. So that's so you have to look into that as well. So we can't. So of course, and I will be honest with this, all my interpretations are in the end based on my own preferences. I mean, it will influence how I do my interpretations.
Yeah. No, it would have to, wouldn't it?
Yes, although I have stepped above it sometimes. I mean, for instance, I was not too fond of intestines, heart, liver, etc. when starting my cookbook. And now I actually find the recipe for the heart one of my favorites.
Yeah, we do like cooking hearts.
Yes.
That always goes down well. Yeah, we've tried all sorts. Certain things are not very palatable, shall we say, when you go down the roads of things like tripe and brains and that.
But it could be a question of what we're used to, but also a question of not really, since we're not using it, not really knowing how to cook it for the best effect.
Sure. Yeah. And I think you were saying sort of about different locations and sort of the cultural context
Yes.
of the food itself. I mean, like with the Vikings, am I right? I think so. There's a lot of finds of oysters in the UK.
Yeah.
Places like York and Shaftesbury Abbey, they were eaten in large numbers. But I think in Scandinavia, they don't really eat them, do they?
Yeah, there's almost nothing.
Yeah.
Oysters, shellfish. So there seems to be an aversion to that.
Mm. Which is
And
strange. And what might have influenced them when they came, I guess, would be the culture that was
yeah,
in Britain at the time.
yes, I think it's. I mean, it would be a bit like today if you consider that you would have some food that are considered quite poor, food that you consider to be sort of something you eat just when sort of when you don't have anything else.
Needs must.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Compared to if you travel somewhere where it is served as delicacy. So in
Yeah.
in England and also Ireland, I think we have quite a lot of shellfish, even at Viking
Mm.
side. You would have a different tradition. In England, definitely, and York, definitely, based on the Roman use of shellfish, where it was a
Yeah.
delicacy. In Scandinavia, and this is my interpretation or an hypothesis,
Yeah.
is that shellfish is considered the same way as gathering fruit in Britain, fruit and nuts, where it's considered a bit of on the low end, sort of something you do when you starve.
Mm. Yeah.
And you would have, I mean, you would have that both in England and in Scandinavia with oysters, fruits, that something that perhaps happened in like a few hundred years earlier when you have this sort of you have the harsh environment and a lot of things doesn't grow. You have this harsh winter, and it's
Yeah.
I think it's a volcanic eruption somewhere that causes temperature to drop quite a bit for a few
Mm.
years. And you will have all over Europe. You have examples of famine. And what you do in famine is that you start gathering things, and it could have lived on as a sort of not taboo, but a way of thinking of that this survival food.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is the most plausible reason, because if you look back into the Stone Age, oysters were really popular in Scandinavia. You have the kitchen middens from Denmark, which are mounds and mounds of oysters.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And it also, I mean, they're quite expensive today. So to think of
Yeah,
them as a poor man's food is shows how different the cultures are between the then and
yeah,
now.
but we have
Yeah.
there's lots of things that will changes during time. What kind of sort of value we put into it? Lobsters, oysters, salmon.
I cooked
Salmon,
lobster yesterday at an event, funnily enough.
yes, it was. I mean,
Yeah.
in the 19th century, it was considered, at least in America, it was considered really cheap food. It was, I think, well, I read somewhere that it was sort of brought in too much of it, so they had to sort of put it down in the ground as fertilizer.
Yeah.
Salmon, which has, well, it's gone down again, but I mean, it was quite fancy food for a while, for a bit. In the medieval Scandinavia, it was stipulated in some places that the farmers should not be fed salmon more than certain months, certain days of the week, because it was cheap in some areas, and they fed the sort of
Right. Yeah.
so they have a contract saying, well, we will not, we don't not want to eat salmon all the days of the week. We need something else.
Mm.
So yes, so the value of food will change with the context.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's also what do you eat? What is food, even? And it's also a thing that we have to reconsider. Is this considered food or not?
Yeah.
Because everything that's edible is not considered food in all cultures.
So yeah, I had a couple of other things I thought I would sort of maybe discuss with you, pick your brains, I guess, would be
Yeah.
the best way to put it. So what I was watching, you sent me a link when we first discussed in the chat to your video you did with the BBC.
Yeah.
And you had that really nice looking fish dish, which I am going to try. I've bought some fish heads.
Yeah, good.
I could only get frozen. I couldn't
Oh,
get dried. So
you should look out in sort of West African shops.
I'm not sure whether we've got any around this way. But,
perhaps not in your area, but if you get to London or somewhere, one of the largest towns, we have a minority of from West Africa. You should definitely get hold of that. Be able to get hold of that.
But as a side note to that video, I noticed at the location you were filming, they had a Mastermeyer grill hanging up behind you in one of the shots. And I wondered what your opinion was on that as a cooking utensil.
I don't think so.
You don't?
No, because it's unique. It's just one of them.
Yeah.
And I don't really think it's cooking equipment. It's being used today. I mean, reenactors use it all the time as a cooking tool.
I use one myself. I've got one. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I don't think it's really. It may be for some other purposes, but I don't really see it as a cooking equipment.
We've tried it off with various different dishes and things that you can cook on there, and you can quite happily sit like flat bottom clay pots like this one will sit quite well on top of it. It takes some getting used to because it also spins as you
yes, I mean it's not really, I mean it's an expensive piece of material. To use it for like flat bottom ceramic vessels, which are usually fine, and put them in the earth, gather the embers around. So it doesn't really make sense to have a spinning device to put the pots on. Grilling, it's not really what I can see is part of. You don't really. You have to. It's a bit of a stretch to think that the people were using it as a barbecue. Rack. You do have some fish in medieval sauces being put on grills.
Yeah.
But, I'm not too convinced that it is cooking equipment.
No, I think the lead idea is that it's probably some kind of lighting.
Yes,
so you sort of hang it up in the rafters.
Yeah, and put embers on top or something.
Yeah.
I guess that has to be tried as well, because there will be a lot of things falling off. But if you, it's difficult.
Yeah, it's going to depend on what. If you had a compacted earth floor, I guess that would be safe. But you wouldn't do it in a wooden floored building or something.
Anyway, it would be an expensive equipment. We can conclude that. It would be rather expensive if you ask a Viking age smith to make that thing.
They're quite expensive today, so I think so to get one back then would certainly be expensive.
Yes, it's not being used for everyday purposes, and then the question is, what would the purpose be?
Yeah, it's another one of those kind of strange mysteries, isn't it?
Yes,
you got that one find. Was it the only one that was ever made? We don't
exactly. So until I find something else in a more of a cooking context, I will not use it in cooking reconstructions. That's
because I think there were some cooking pots in with.
There's some bottoms from frying pans. That's I think that's what's found in the Mestemir. There's no cooking pot. There's I think there's. I'm not sure if there's a whole cooking frying pan, but there's sort of the round part of cooking of a frying pan.
I think there's a couple, and I think some are parts that are probably, I think they believe they would have been kept for scrap for reusing for something else, and I think there was at least one that was intact.
I think so, something like that. So that's what you have for cooking equipment, and of course that's the smith's equipment, or So that's the context of cooking in the Mestemir find.
Yeah.
But the problem is it's Mestemir find, so it could be really anything, because it's a craftsman's chest.
Yeah.
And using things. Very difficult to conclude.
I mean, it could have just been an experiment. He could have been like the prototype for something, but
could be as well.
that was lost. It's quite an expensive thing to lose, especially with everything else that's in that find as well.
That's, the whole chest is expensive to lose. And I don't think it's just lost, like forgotten to where it is. But
yeah. I'm just checking what the time is because I know you've got other things to be doing today, so we should speed along. I was briefly going to say to you that because we've chatted on my page a couple of times about this Bronze Age Brunost, potentially, or that I think is Brunost. So it's the pot with the burned milk.
Yes.
And I was just going to say to you whilst we were chatting, I did an experiment with the guy. So he made me a pot, which I've got here. And we did try it and see what would happen. And the first experiment, it kind of worked, but we realized we heated the milk way too quickly.
Yeah, all right.
And so we ended up with a burned pot, a lot like the find.
Yeah.
And I know one of the things you mentioned to me was I needed to monitor the wood use, which obviously you do use a lot of wood because it takes hours. A little pot like this gets you a tiny blob of Brunost and takes a day or so to boil away.
Yeah.
But then at a later date at an event, I only put it by the fire when I was cooking other things. So it was on, off, on, off. And over a period of a couple of days, I managed to do it without burning it, and I made Brunost.
Okay.
So
yeah,
it was just an experiment, just to see if I could.
Yeah, it's interesting. I still think it's unlikely because of the sort of amount of time needed that you would have put the milk to better use, and especially as I said, if you can do it on the side, that's good, and that's since you sort of heat out everything from it, it probably will not go bad because it's just sugar being left. But still, I find it's a bit unlikely. I think that you would use the milk, the soured milk, or the whey in this case, in better uses. So I think it's rather. I think the evidence you have from your first experiment is more conclusive with the find, which is it was a mistake of making something else. For instance, if you heat it up for making cheese or making something.
Yeah. And then burn it on.
Yes, and then burn it, because that happens.
It does. And we actually, funnily enough, we found that when it was in the fire, it started to boil over. And when we took it out of the fire, because of the residual heat in the clay, it just kept going.
Yes.
And it was just sat on the ground boiling over like a volcano.
So so you lose things as well. That's
so you lost a fair amount of content. Yes.
So you have to do it very slowly and monitor it in that way. You have to make sure that it doesn't get too heated, but warm enough for it to evaporate or So, perhaps and this is I don't recall exactly the find, but was the pot a bit like the one you got here?
Similar, it's an intact pot. I can't remember exactly where, but it was in Denmark. And it was cow fat resin, I think, on there.
If you want to do it, if you want to make, this is my guess now, just from now, so I haven't anything to base it on. But if you want to sort of evaporate, reduce it, you would like to have a pot which is not curved inwards, because a pot shaped like that, you will have quite a lot of the evaporation going back into the pot. It will take longer time.
Yeah. So you need something with straighter,
or even edging outwards, not rather than inwards.
Yeah, I have got a couple of others actually that would probably be closer to that. But because they're modern replicas, they're also glazed inside. I was trying to avoid using one that had a glazing on it, which is why we went for that one.
Yeah, and when you did so the pot, how did it stick when you made it when it worked? So I mean, if you got porous pottery, I mean,
so it didn't actually burn on the second occasion. I managed to do it without any burning. Yeah,
but still, I mean, it would sort of stick to the inside, I guess, the residue.
It does, and funnily enough, so especially the first time when it burned on, we were convinced initially that we'd wrecked the pot and that was the end of the pot. So we left it, and the next day we put some water in there, which we gently heated. And when we emptied it out, it came out almost clean again, even with the burned residue on it, which I was quite surprised because it's unglazed. It had no, surface protection on there, but it still managed to clean up. That I've been able to use it again anyway.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So, and how much did you get from sort of just curious now? From how much whey did you use, and how much much of a blob did you get?
So this pot was full to the top.
Yes.
And it was a tiny little blob at the end. It wasn't a lot. It was sweet. It almost. Have you tried the Marmite before?
Yeah, once.
Yeah. One of those love it or hate it things.
Yeah.
Particularly the first one, when we burned a considerable amount of the pot, it came out with a kind of Marmite-y sweet taste. So we kind of figured we'd made Viking Marmite. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so that was just an experiment we did, and I thought I'd just update you and let you know how we'd got on with it. Yeah.
So I guess the sort of exchange of whey to finished produce is sort of telling.
Yeah. It's a lot of wastage.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, as you said, you can use it for better things, for preserving or something else, or bulking out breads, or even just drinking. I guess it's exactly. A safe liquid to drink. Yeah.
Well, unless you're lactose intolerant, that's how I find out.
That's not very helpful. Right, so I know you've got only about 5 minutes left, right?
Yeah.
So we want to speed it.
To 10 minutes. It's Okay.
Because I've got like the set questions I wanted to get through.
Yeah. Go through
but I wondered if you wanted to really quickly mention the event that you've got coming up, which is why you're so busy.
Yes.
Just to give yourself a plug.
Yes. So in about a month from now, it's the large medieval festival in Visby, Medeltidsveckan. It's the largest Scandinavian medieval festival. It's a full week in Visby, which is a medieval town with sort of remaining walls, etc. And it will it's a huge event. It usually has about 100,000 visitors. So it involves the whole town. And this year they have a food and drink theme. So I'm doing, so we're setting up this site where we'll be doing like 5 or 6 different workshops. And some other friends are doing lectures, workshops, and I'm trying to pull things together. So that's
I've seen you've got some pretty good names involved as well, haven't you?
Yeah. Yes. So I was doing 3 Viking workshops, 2 in English, 1 in Swedish, sausage making and everyday food. And then I will do vegetarian medieval food and 16th century food as well. So that will be
a nice big range of.
Yes, this big range. I need to start sort of do some preparations and try out some of the recipes I will do. And we have another course, me and Hanna Thunberg, with my co-writer.
Yeah.
So making a workshop on medieval taste and the sort of the idea of taste in the medieval period compared to today, and do medieval cooking in a modern kitchen as well. So it'll be 5 workshops with historical context cooking, and 1 in modern context but medieval dishes.
Yeah.
So
sounds fun.
Yes, and I will send you the link to. We made a Facebook group where we will post all the lectures and workshops, and you got the link already, so perhaps you can share it.
Yeah, I've been added to the group. So what I'll do is when I pop this out to the public, I'll put it underneath. So if anyone's interested, they can click on the link and go to the Facebook page.
Do so, and share the BBC video as well, because it was interesting, even if they made me look into. It's a bit like a sort of creature from some fairy tale.
No, I thought it was a good video. It was a good video and an interesting recipe as well. Is that one? Are you planning another cookbook? Is that part of that, or is that just...
either that or an update? We're not really, but it's sort of something I do for workshops now. So we will see what's happening with the new dishes. I think I have almost enough to make another cookbook, but then it's to make the context. So my current project is working on doing the Danish medieval cookbook into English and give it
Okay.
a context chapter like the Viking cookbook. So this is my current project, and that will be hopefully finished soon.
As you've mentioned it, I do have it here. I do have my copy. So if anyone hasn't seen it before, an early meal, it's definitely worth picking up. I've had it for a couple of years, I think. Yeah.
So it should be available on Amazon and other places.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
Thank you.
Yes. So we'll just do the very quick run through those last questions. So we've got 3 questions, and then we'll close, and then we'll do 3 more for anyone that wants to see more. They can head over to my Patreon and get a little bit more content with you as well.
Sounds good.
So these are just for fun. So the first one is, if you had an unlimited budget, what would be your dream project?
Oh, that's a difficult one, actually. But I would, of course, I would like to sort of build. Well, no, actually, yes, I would like to build a proper medieval kitchen to have access to, sort of in-house with everything. Of course, I would like to have a Viking kitchen as well, but that's easier to get hold of in a way. It's easy to, but have a proper medieval kitchen with an oven, with the hearth. That's
Would that be for your own personal use, or would you want to have people coming in to learn cooking? Or
yes, well, actually, yes. If you're talking about a limited budget, then yes, it would be for my own personal use. But yes, I would probably use that if I had the space and I have the money. Yeah, I would like to do something where I could have a Viking Age and a medieval kitchen and Renaissance kitchen and have a workshop there, and not just going places, and have something in my own backyard, so to speak. That would be great.
All right, so the next question is, and I reckon I can guess the answer to this. Do you think you could survive on a Viking Age diet?
Yeah. That's not the problem, I think.
You kind of do already. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, well, not really, but yes, I can. I do. I can make enough to have even a variation. Although I think I could also live off the sort of. This is something we didn't talk about, but I think food would have been more repetitive than we do today.
Yeah.
Also, again about standards today and historical standards.
Yeah.
So, but I could have savory porridges a few days in a week and thrive on that.
Yeah. Well, as you said, there's stuff we haven't covered. So if we ever get the chance and we're in the same place at the same time, we'll have to try and do one in person, because they're a lot easier, I find, than doing a Zoom.
Definitely.
Yeah. So the last question from that group is there anything you'd miss on a Viking Age diet?
Yeah, of course. I have huge sweet foods, so I would really lack cookies, cakes, pastries, and other sort of indulgences like sodas. So you have of course there would be things I would be missing. Tea as well. Good tea. Yes, there are things I would be missing.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And also, spices as well. The exotic spices. Yes, I like them. So I wouldn't miss them.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
It's been excellent to have you. I'll pop some links under the video to your Facebook and the group for your event that's coming up. And I'll see if I can pop a link to the book on Amazon or something as well for anyone that needs to get it. So thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed the podcast or want to hear more, remember to like and subscribe and give me a rating. For recipes and ideas, visit my website saxonforager.co.uk. I also have 3 cookbooks available to buy on Amazon worldwide. These are Eat Like a Viking Volumes 1 and 2 and Eat Like a Halfling. Thanks for watching.